All right, we are live. So again, I'll close the door in about a minute with the weather. So again, I'm a biomechanist, and by definition, that just means that I'm weird. All right, and that's okay to be weird. Someone asked me the other day, they were like, "Did you coach a soccer team?" I'm like, "No, I'm just old and I wear compression socks, and my family has circulation issues. I don't care. I don't match a lot of times. That's okay. Like, when you're going to see me with my shirt, it's inside out. I know it's inside out. I have, I'm just old, I'm getting old, but I have bursa issues from friction, and the inside seams of my shirts rub where and like I had an MRI to confirm that that's what it is. As a biomechanist, I'm like, okay, friction's the issue. How do I solve the friction? Larger shirts inside out, much smoother on my shoulders. I'm weird. It's okay. Just embrace the weirdness and come along in this journey. Also, I don't have pre-planned lectures in terms of I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this, then I'm going to say this. I know where we're going to get, but I have no idea. We could be Lord of the Rings adventure here and go through all kinds of wandering woods. To me, that's what makes class fun and exciting. You just never know what you're going to get, but I promise you I know where we're going. Okay? All right. Let me close the door and we'll get to work. Again, once again, I made an exception for today with the weather, but we are going to start at 7:30. Plan accordingly. Set your alarm early. Plan for trains, planes, and automobiles, so that you're here on time. And it's a good habit to form, being on time. Again, I'd hate for you to have your dream interview and you treat it the same way you do everything else, and then all of a sudden you're late for that interview. Maybe you don't get that job. It's just good to be on time. I'm not saying you got to be an hour early, but 5-10 minutes early, what's the worst that can happen? We talk about injuries in soccer and pop culture. That's not so bad. Okay. All right, you guys. Let's clarify some things. I know it's before I get into that, there's some jobs postings. I have 5 sections of classes. It's hard for me with my dyslexic brain to remember. So to email every class the same stuff. So I have a class Instagram account that students started. There's a few like sample questions on there, but it's not updated because they aren't here anymore. And so I said, well, I could use that to post job openings, tech stuff. This clinic, I've formed students all over the place, and they're like, Doc, we're looking for a tech, we're looking for this, we're looking for that. So I think it's 310, and also the women in kinesiology asked them to share it when I posted. So it's like KNES 310 _ 415. I posted 2 new tech jobs there, and also the women in kinesiology club. Hopefully KPA also posted too. But anytime there's a job opening, I'm just going to post it there. Okay? I think that was, yes, now we can get on to business. It is natural for you guys, especially my teaching style. Tell me what's on the test. I am. I'm just not going to give you exactly what's on the test. In class, I might do some math problems and say 2 + 2 is 4. And you're like, okay, he said 2 + 2 is 4. I'm going to get ready to see 2 + 2 is 4. But you're never going to see 2 + 2 is 4. But you know what you will see? What's 2 + 3? What's 2 + 2 - 1? Like, in other words, math, you understand the concepts, and with one concept, you can answer 1,000 questions, okay? So let me clarify some concepts here. Last class, I tried to emphasize that we have 4 main types of bone, and their main classification comes with purpose. So on the test, I might say, which of our bones has a function of dissipating force? Flats are great at dissipating force, or protection. The short bones are great at remember sand, like landed in sand, dissipation of force and summation of motion, like the dominoes, the slinky. Long bones, bless you. The long bones are great for movement stuff, and the irregulars are the weirdos that do specialized functions, right? So again, like, even though I don't spell it out, I use keywords that I emphasize in class, okay? Going to articulations, I planned on kind of revisiting this before we go on into fetal position today, not like literally because it's Friday, this class stuff. This looks like a lot. My job is to make it simple, okay? Will you have to learn some new words? Yeah, we learn new stuff every day. Breaking it down. You have bones that form joints, and they're subclassified based off of movement possibilities. You have structural classifications, and then you have functional classifications. But it's two different ways of looking at the same thing. They're still joints, okay? There's some of these that we're going to really, really care about. And there's others that you just have to know that, like a fibrous joint, these three are fibrous joints that don't move significantly. As a gomphosis, it's like your tooth inside your gums. Do you think we care about that? No, but one day a dentist may care about it. But it's an articulation with a bone that's not supposed to move. Okay? A syndesmosis, has anybody ever heard of a high ankle sprain? That's a syndesmotic sprain. That's your tibia and your fibula, two bones that technically articulate, but because of those tight ropes and ligaments, they're not supposed to move about each other. So one day that's going to be important when you guys go into grad school or you deal with injuries. And but I'm introducing, this is introduction. This is a 300 level class. I'm introducing you to these things so that you're like, oh yeah, I remember that when you learn to develop and master. Sutures, that's again the skull, right? You have these growth plates, it's cartilage, and then they suture up, they freeze up, and so technically it's still bone articulated with bone, but it's your body cement. All right. Notice nothing in regard to axes. This matches up with this. Fibrous joints are functionally classified as synarthrotic. They don't move. In other words, doesn't move, doesn't move, doesn't move, but they all don't move because of different reasons. That's why we have those different classifications. But what do they all have in common? Bones that articulate with other bones, but they don't move. So it makes sense we don't have anything for axis here. No motion. And if it does move, that's a bad day. Okay? Cartilaginous joints, amphiarthrotic joints, a little bit more than this, but not enough to be significant. Let's see what these are. Synchondrotic and symphysis. Your vertebrae, great examples. I know you've heard of your pubic symphysis. Right? So this is some cartilage that allows a little bit of play. Not enough, that would look like it would hurt. Just a little bit, because when you're doing hip stuff and you're doing other stuff, it's like a tree that sways. If that tree didn't sway a little bit, it would snap in half. It's going to give a little bit. A tall building sways. Has anybody been in a tall building and like you feel it swaying? It's freaky. If it didn't, it would collapse. So a little bit of motion. Pubic symphysis in your vertebra, that's what your discs are. A little bit of motion because of the cartilage there, and then synchondrosis is a little bit of motion because of that's the disc. So this would be like the pubic symphysis. This would be the vertebral disc. The key thing, though, guys, is that little bits can add up to a lot. That's the slinky example. The sum of the little bits can produce significant motion, but it's not all happening in one place. It's the sum total of a bunch of little places. Okay? These are the ones that we are going to go more in depth with. So let me give you an example of how I could ask a question. Which of the following is not a fibrous joint? By asking that question, that's not asking you to memorize. It's just asking you, oh yeah, I remember the 3 types of fibrous joints were this. I remember the 2 types of cartilaginous joints are that. In fact, that's questions that I feel most students want me to ask because it's cut and dry. Right? These are the 4 classifications of bone. Remember, sesamoid is a subclass of flat. Those are the kind of questions like that I'm going to ask. These are the most important. For the first test, all I'm asking you to know is that they exist. In follow-up tests, we're going to go into what are the specific glidings, what are the specific hinges, what are the specific... When I get into, all right, the angle is a hinge, I need you to know what that is. We can't go back and learn just the concept of a hinge joint. How many of you have ever heard of synovial fluid, right, in joints? You've heard of that before. And synovial fluid is like oil you would put in a car to reduce friction, right? Well, if there's friction, that means there's motion. Ta-da, that's what synovial joints are. They're significant movable articulations that require synovial fluid to reduce friction. In a structural classification, I'm going to show you we have gliding joints. That's the sum total kind of thing. Right? So the sum total of a lot of little bits is a lot. It's a lot of mouth words. Hinge joints. Instead of the door, we have our elbows. I'm going to teach you that each of these, this is uniaxial, triaxial, uniaxial, biaxial, debatable bi or tri. You don't even know that for the first test. Once we go into more detail for those specific joints, I'm going to say, hey, remember how we had a classification called an ellipsoid joint? That's what your wrist is. It's a biaxial ellipsoid, meaning it can move in two of its planes, about two of its axes. That's why in the functional class characteristic, it's uni-bi. We're going to use the word tri. This is just I found this diagram that I really like. It kind of set everything up. Unicycle, bicycle, tricycle. A unicycle has one axis, a bi has one wheel, two wheels, and a tri is like trying to balance on a medicine ball. That sucker could go all over, right? So we're going to try to simplify things. This is what I need you to know for your first test, so that when we develop these concepts further, this part is already in your brain. Cool? Any questions? All right. Very good, very good, very good. We went over the importance of identifying sides, right? We also need on the first test to identify joints. I am assuming you guys have been introduced to the concept of this is a wrist, this is an elbow, this is a shoulder. My job is to develop the concept of, ready to update? No. I hope that didn't come in on the screen. My job is to teach you that if I do this, my elbow didn't have motion. Now, you may say, well, dude, your elbow moved. Remember, joint motion is the rotational component of motion. If I'm in an elevator and the elevator goes up, that didn't mean all my joints moved. Right? So did my elbow move? Well, it's in a 90-degree position here. It's in a 90-degree position here. Does that make sense? So where was that motion? My job is to teach you, oh, that was the shoulder that had the rotation. All this stuff just went along for the ride. My job is to show you that only the elbow had motion because my wrist stayed in the same position. That's like we're still in Lafayette, even though the earth is spinning. Are we moving? Technically, the earth is spinning and it's going around the sun, but we didn't move relative to where we are right here. That's the key. Did my shoulder move? No. Did my cervical vertebra move? No. You see what I'm trying to get at? Did my cervical vertebra move? Yes. That's part of this class, identifying side and joint so that we can say the right wrist did what? The left elbow is where? The left hip did what? The right knee did what? And there's a lot of illusions. And that's why we practice. All right? So we went over this. It is important to know, or I'll say to know, I think you know it, just don't make the common mistake of, if I say, all right guys, where did this motion happen? It's the left elbow, not your right elbow. Does that make sense? Because it's me, it is my motion. And if we lined up, we would both do the same thing. How can it be different? And to put the cherry on top, because I love to beat dead kinesiology horses, metaphorically, I love animals. If we all agree this is the left humerus, then this must be the left elbow. It's no different. Why would it change? Okay? And the reason I'm beating that metaphor with dead horse is because so many people miss that on the test. I think it's just habit. Okay? All right, so we're analyzing motion joint by joint. I introduced you to global and local references. We have some QR codes that you can scan to see some of my past students doing some examples. Guys, you've seen it, I've said it, we analyze motion joint by joint. We can talk about movement patterns as a whole, right? But think about it, we are artists of the human body. We are different than people who practice kinesiology without a college education. I'm not saying we're better, we're different. A musician hears a song for all of the different pieces. I don't know much about music, so I just hear the song. But a trained musician can hear the pianos, can hear the guitars, can hear the violins, right? That's how we need to be with the human body. We can talk about functional tasks like shooting free throws and kicking a soccer ball, or different movement strategies in general. That's fine, but we need to see the different instruments that make up the music. And in this analogy, our different instruments are, what are my elbows doing? What are my wrists doing? What are my knees doing? What are my hips doing? What are my pelvis doing? What is my trunk doing? We have to be able to be musicians of the human body so that we can extract all of the different things that are happening at the same time, because that could be very distracting. I can't fathom hearing a piece of music and being able to decipher all of the different instruments, but trained people can. Okay? All right, my favorite part of class. How many of you have heard things like flexion is a decrease of a joint angle? Anybody ever heard, like maybe in a 100 level class or in high school, like flexion is decreasing of a joint angle? I was so proud. Every now and then I hear it from former students that are in graduate school. And remember, the whole point of this isn't to do anything other than to give consistency to verbiage. And in class, their teacher said, flexion is a decrease in a joint angle. Student raises his hand and very respectfully says, which angle? Someone who was in the class with him told me this. I was like, yes. What I mean by that is, let's look at the wrist, not an anatomical position. If I decrease this angle, what am I doing to this angle? And if I decrease this angle, what am I doing to this angle? It's impossible to decrease one and not increase another. You have to be specific. And in fact, all the rules don't always apply. Oh, well, increase the front anterior angle. All right, explain this. Or, remember how I said linearity is the enemy of rotation? Well, flexion of the wrist is decreasing the front angle. Okay, what happens if I pronate? The back becomes the front becomes the back. As a physicist who applies my craft to the human body, I just want what engineers have, consistency. Like, you never hear engineers arguing over angles, and then like, it's what it is, it's, as my major professor used to say. So we are going to keep it simple. Flexion is any joint motion in the sagittal plane, and I'm going to explain why, that gets you into fetal position. Flexion gets you into fetal. That's why we have so many different joints that flex, because they're all trying to do the same thing. Get you into a ball. You know what's not going to get me in a fetal position? Look out! Watch out! Ah! Heads up! Ah! The sagittal plane is the road about which flexion takes you from the town of anatomical to the town of fetal. So think about all the things that can get me in a fetal. My fingers can get me in a fetal. My wrist can get me in a fetal. My elbow can get me in a fetal. My shoulder can get me in a fetal. Y'all know those birthday party favors? Right? Fetal, 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 fetal. ESPN has been messing with your brains. This is not shoulder extension. Full extension, maybe at the elbow, but the player was probably extended when he was down here. Okay? This is shoulder flexion. Do we agree that this is hip flexion? My favorite icing on the cake, why this is not shoulder extension. Heads up, look out! Ah! Is the threat over yet? Makes sense? That's an old reference. It's an old joke. Flexion gets you in the fetal. Now, notice anatomical position is a place. Fetal position is a place. That doesn't mean all of the joints. That doesn't mean it's all or none. My fingers can travel into their fetal, their flexed position. My wrist doesn't have to do what the fingers are doing. My elbow doesn't have to do what the fingers are doing. It's a concept of universal fetal position just to show you how the different joints are trying to accomplish the same thing. But my elbow can have flexion and my wrist could have extension, right? So what is the opposite direction of spin that would get you more in a fetal? What is the opposite flexion? Extension. Ta-da! Now, isn't that more easily to absorb than angles, which can constantly change and move? Is the joint getting more into its fetal position? If yes, it's flexion. If no, it's extension. Any questions about that before I move on? I'm not moving on to the fetal flexion concept. I'm going to develop it a little more. But any questions? Fetal flexion gets you closer to fetal. Extension gets you further away from fetal. Notice I said nothing about anatomical. Anatomical is just a place. Some joints in the body are all the way at the end of their road. Campbell, what does that mean? The elbow in anatomical position can't get any further away from fetal unless we have an injury. And that's why we have the term hyper. Hyper just means excessive, beyond normal. Hyperventilation, hypertrophy, hyperactive, hyperextension, right? Some joints, like the elbows and the knees, are as far away from fetal as they can get, but not every joint. My wrist can, from anatomical, can get closer to fetal. It can have flexion from anatomical, but at anatomical, it can get further away from fetal. I don't call this extension. I don't call this hyperextension. That's normal range of motion. I call that hyperextension. But you know what else you can have? Hyperflexion. That happens. Making a tackle with your head down. Not a good thing, right? You don't have hyperflexion. Hyper is just excessive. The reason I think students struggle is because the only examples you were ever taught happen to be the easiest, which are at the end of their road in anatomical. Guys, think about this for a second. Elbow, flexion, extension, hyperextension. So then they try to apply it to other areas. Well, if this is flexion, this is extension, that must be hyperextension. Yes, in bizarro world, but not in mechanics. That makes no sense. That's like saying exact same thing. Clockwise, counterclockwise, hyperclockwise. Like no, it's just, how is it spinning? And unlike the clock that can keep spinning forever, our joints can't. They eventually run out of road. If you go beyond that road, excessive motion. Dead end. And sometimes students, great questions. I'm recalling, and again, I'm going to take back roads. We're going to go through Leesville. You know, we may go through some small towns. When you see a movement pattern that looks like it's continuous, it's not. It's a combination. That's like taking the Etch-a-Sketch, moving both knobs, and you can make circles. I have to have multiple motions in order to reposition these things. Everybody stand up for a second. If you want to, you don't have to, but I think this is fun. Stand up and get a pen in your hand. We are going to do a continuous movement pattern to try to make my point. Okay, you have a pen. Most of the time, people would do this with glasses. Ooh, I need to water that down next time. Follow me, palm up with your pen. Okay. Watch what we're going to do. Follow my movement pattern. We're going to go down. And we're just going to keep going. No, but that's the trick. It's not one range of motion. It's a movement pattern formed by multiple motions, not all happening at the same time. Have a seat. All right. Let me explain. It's not going to be in your first test. I'm trying to prove a point so that you trust me. Man, this dude's telling me something I've never heard before. Everything I'm telling you is from a physics-based. Newton's been right for a long time. Watch this. When I'm down here, I'm going to have pronation of my radial ulnar joint. Okay? Now I'm pronated. I can't pronate anymore. So what I need to do is raise my arm up. I'm going to have like some abduction or some lift up stuff. And then from here, I'm going to externally rotate my shoulder and supinate my radial ulnar joint at the same time. So now I'm in a new position so that I can pronate again. I don't keep having, the clock hand doesn't keep spinning. I reposition the clock in an illusionary way so that I can just rotate the 180. Pronation, oh gosh, I'm out of road. I'm going to have to use my shoulder to reposition it. There's the supination so that I can have pronation. It's an illusion. You can do it. We'll work on it. It's an illusion. If I could do it, you could do it. I got no range of motion. Fetal, anatomical. Flexion gets you closer to fetal position. Think of it as, Lord of the Rings, think of it as like a land. If we're here, think of it as a place. You know, what's one of the most popular international destination spots in the world? Franklin, Louisiana. It just starts with F. That's why. So it's like flexion would get you closer to Franklin. Extension would get you further away. Notice, nowhere in there was anatomical. Flexion and extension is all about into, closer to, or further away from feet. Okay? So for your test, I'm going to jump ahead because I know how important it is. Campbell, what are we going to have to learn for the test? It's not that I'm going to not go back to this. These are the articulating joints that you're going to be accountable for your first test. Your neck can get closer to fetal. Flexion. Extension. Now, how do we differentiate? Well, I don't understand. What if I start an anatomical and then I extend? No problem. Let's say anatomical of my neck is Lafayette and flexion extension is I-10, something we're familiar with. You can be traveling east from Lafayette. You could be traveling west back to Lafayette. And then you can continue traveling west from Lafayette. Does that make any sense whatsoever? You can be in Lafayette, travel east from, turn around, travel west to, continue on and travel west from. And that's what I'm going to teach you. Flexion from anatomical. I know exactly where I'm at. And how do we know what mile marker we're on? That's why we have goniometry, right? That's why we have goniometry. I have this many degrees of flexion from anatomical position, or I have this many degrees of extension from anatomical position. I have to have a reference for those numbers to mean something. I'm at mile marker 92 from the border, right? It has to be in reference to something. You're going to be responsible for seeing cervical flexion and extension and understanding position. Where am I at? Now, where are you at? Where is your joint at? Is relative to anatomical. That's where anatomical comes in. Where are you at is a different question from where are you going. I'll give you a very common example. Who lives east of Lafayette? Okay, for those of you that are watching, nobody raised their hands. They're all Westerners. All right, I'm just going to pretend. You, ma'am, in the blue chair. I have a lot of voices in my head. Let's say this is your only class and you're going home. You're driving to Breaux Bridge. If some of you don't know, Breaux Bridge is what, maybe 10 miles east of Lafayette? Okay. Lafayette is home to the school. Lafayette is anatomical position in this analogy. You're going home, you're traveling east of Lafayette. You are east as you're traveling, and you're traveling east. It looks like it's moving, and it is. But what happens when that student comes back to Lafayette? They're traveling west, but they're still east of Lafayette. Until they get here. In other words, Breaux Bridge is 10 miles away. Well, at mile marker 5 miles, they're traveling in a western direction, but they're still 5 miles east of Lafayette. Yes or no? It's okay to say no. You good? We're good with that analogy? Let's go and up and down. I'm going to, you're from Shreveport. You can be traveling south and pass through Natchitoches. You're traveling south, but you're still north of Lafayette. Tell me we understand that, and then I'm going to apply it to the joints, and then you're like, that's what that means. So I know that my cervical vertebra can travel down Interstate 10. One plane, one road, 2 different directions of spin, east-west, in this analogy. I can have flexion from anatomical position and be flexed. But But I can also have extension to anatomical position and still be flexed. Flexion from anatomical, extension to anatomical, extension from anatomical. I can have flexion but still be extended. Make sense? That's how we do it. I can be flexed but yet have extension. My shoulder is still in a flexed position, even though I'm moving in a direction of extension. Because position, where are you at, is a different question than where are you going. One gives more context, but it's very natural. We've been doing this our whole lives. If my dad says, my dad's almost 80, love him to death. He was the best man at my wedding. And I'm going to try to talk like him. Michelle, where you at? Pop, I'm in Baton Rouge. Oh, okay, that's good, that's good. May you coming home? Because where I'm at wasn't enough information for his question. He wanted to know, am I traveling west or am I traveling east? Just giving my position is important information, but it doesn't tell me, it doesn't tell him where I'm going. Where you're at doesn't line up all the time with where you're going. That is the lesson for today. My hip can be flexed, but it can be extending. My hip can be extended and be flexing. That's okay. So think about it. Every joint can have at least 3 different positions. Where are you at? My hip could be in a flexed position. My hip can be in an extended position, or my hip could be in an anatomical position. Fetal position is more of a concept, because what fetal doesn't give us is how many miles did you travel to get in the fetal? In other words, that's where goniometry comes from, right? My shoulder has this many degrees of flexion. My hip has this many degrees of flexion. My hip has this many degrees of extension. So fetal is just a concept that kind of gets us to understand what flexion and extension means. But position, where are you at, is not the same as where are you going. That is what students struggle with. And we're going to do a ton of examples, guys. So on your test, you're going to need to know cervical, trunk, shoulder, elbow, wrist, hip, and knee. That sounds like a lot, but remember, we're only talking about one road. I'm not going to give you different we're not going to talk about I-49 on the first test. I need us to understand the concepts of where are you at and where are you going, and functionality. So all of our first exam questions are going to be sagittal rope. That doesn't mean I can't ask you concepts of frontal and transverse plane, but I'm saying in terms of identifying a joint position. Examples, yeah. Headache, jam. His left hip is flexed. Based off of what? Anatomical position. If he comes up, he's going to have hip extension. Based off of what? He's getting further away from his left hip's fetal position. Kind of simple when you make sense of it. His left shoulders are flexed. Do we agree? Same thing. What motion would his shoulders have when we go to left to right? Bilateral shoulder extension. They got further away from fetal. That's powerful. We didn't have to worry about angles, which one's the front, the backs, let me get out my ruler. Did you get closer to fetal? Did you get further away from fetal? That's flexion extension. Where are you at? Your position is based off of anatomical. I'm in a flexed position here at my shoulders. I'm in anatomical position here at my shoulders. Everything has a place. If it doesn't, oh gosh, this might sound awesome or it might sound cheesy. If it doesn't have a place, it's misplaced. It's displaced. It's dislocated. I love making up new words. Where is his right knee? Anatomical. Yoink. That right knee's like, dude, I'm still home. I didn't leave left yet. I'm still exactly where I started out at. What about the elbows? Did the elbows have motion? Oh, elbows are like, I'm still straight. I'm not closer to fetal. I'm not further away from fetal. There's only 3 joints that are significantly away from where they start. Both shoulders and the left hip. If you start here, this one is in the back. Yeah, we can look at that. His right hip appears to be extended. Extended compared to what? Like guys, think about it. Bro Bridge is east of Lafayette, but Baton Rouge is east of Bro Bridge, which means Bro Bridge is west of Baton Rouge, right? We have to have a universal reference to make sense of all this stuff. That right hip is extended. Well, from what? Anatomical. It's further away from fetal compared to our universal starting position. That's why anatomical is a universal starting position, because it gives reference to what is east and what is west. I meant to do that. And I know things are weird. We're weird. Why is anatomical position here and not there? My big toe is on the inside. Why is my thumb on the inside? Sometimes there's no right or wrong. I think it's because when you're in anatomical position, your forearm bones line up. Like your radius is lateral, your fibula is lateral. The ulna, the bigger, thicker lower arm bone, lines up with the tibia. I mean, guys, no other creature can do this. I mean, so give us a little grace, okay? But it establishes where we can reference things. We don't have to say, well, technically, Bro Bridge is east of Lafayette, but it's west of Baton Rouge. That's too many movable parts. Everything is referenced off of anatomical. That makes things easy. All right, here's a fun question. This is called foreshadowing. True or false? In the picture on the right, his right hip is slightly extended from anatomical. You know how I know that? I see space between the legs. Like, if the legs were lined up in anatomical, I wouldn't see that other leg. Yoink. True? Okay. Now let's go to this new picture. What if I told you that on the test, his right hip is in anatomical position? If you started in Bro Bridge and you ended in Lafayette, how did you have to travel on I-10? Bro Bridge is east of Lafayette. So if you came to Lafayette, didn't you have to travel west? So if I started in an extended position and I finished in anatomical, it doesn't matter. This is old school 2000s The Rock wrestling. It doesn't matter if you didn't see it. I could look at a GPS. Y'all, my mom drives me crazy. I see y'all just passed into Texas. I'm watching you on my phone. Mom, come on, bro. You think we're going to the casino? We're going to the casino. My point is let's say my mom looks at her GPS because she's retired, she's bored. I love you, Mom, if you're watching. And she sees that we in Breaux Bridge, and then she takes a nap and she wakes up and we in Lafayette. She didn't have to see us travel there, but you know what we didn't do? Go through the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific and end up in Lafayette. Does that make any sense? We don't have to see the motion. We started out slightly extended. We ended at anatomical. We had to have flexion to get there. It's and is. In fact, we have to rely more on clues than our eyes. You know why? Because our eyes lie to us all the time. And there's a reason for that, is we can't process the frames per second. We're very limited. We fill in gaps. You don't keep your eyes on the ball at a higher level, maybe in elementary school when they lobbing it, but eventually that ball's moving too fast. So you have to process and anticipate where the ball may be so that you can make the bat meet up with the ball. You're not following the ball at 100 miles an hour. There's no way. You're guessing based off of context clues. And how do you guess more right than wrong? Well, in baseball, you don't. Practice. 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 Guys, some of you are going to be working with athletes. Those athletes get hurt. Our biggest job as athletic trainer to try to understand the mechanism of injury. And sometimes you're not going to have, especially at lower schools, they don't have technology for slow speed cameras. You're going to have to be able to see, visualize, and infer. We do not assume, but we can infer. When we infer, that means educated calculations that walk us down a path of a reasonable answer. Human motion is fast. Watch, I'm going to do 10 jumping jacks as fast as I can. Y'all want to see it again? It's fast. So sometimes all we have in our toolbox is, where are you at? Where did you go? How did you have to move to get there? All right, guys, y'all have a good weekend.